Hey, what's up, guys? It's Nick2. I don't know what is going on with my hair today, but we're going to try our best to ignore that because we got more important things to talk about, like Lightning Spear being probably the best build in the entire game and how you guys can set it up, and just giving you guys all the information you need to know to absolutely just annihilate everything in the game. I'd say this is probably overall the best build because you can just do Infernal Hordes unbelievably quickly like nobody else's business. Because it is all conjurations, the lightning spears are just flying around the map constantly, just absolutely nuking everything. The damage potential is just completely ridiculous. It is very fun to play, and also it's one of the fastest builds in the game. If you're interested in like speed farming pits, you can do pits ridiculously quickly in like just a minute. You can do like a tier 100 if you wanted to farm pits that way. The boss damage is probably the only downside of that build, and as you can see, it's not even really that much of a downside. It just isn't going to instantaneously one-shot tormented bosses, but the boss damage is still really good. It ramps up like crazy, especially in the Infernal Hordes. The boss damage against the 3 bosses at the end is pretty ridiculous, and that is the only downside of the build. Outside of that, though, for clearing just general dungeons or just doing the Infernal Hordes, nothing in the game can even compare to how quickly, how efficiently, and just how overly dominant this build really is for that. This build does have a couple caveats, though, in the form of you need a pretty good amount of gear to actually get it going. So if you're just swapping to Sorc, I would highly recommend you check out my firewall leveling build video. Definitely level with that. You can get to level like 70 very, very easily with that. And then I would recommend transitioning either into Blizzard Sorcerer or Fireball. Blizzard is extremely powerful this season, actually, and it has almost no gear requirements, and it is going to do much more boss damage than Fireball would. So I'd recommend playing that until you end up getting some of the gear that is necessary for Lightning Spear to actually come online. I'll talk about that in a second, but first let's get into today's sponsor, which is going to be Mobalytics. You can download the Mobalytics desktop app completely for free using my link down in the description, and here are some of the benefits of the app. First of all of my builds are going to be posted on there, so if you're interested in playing Sorc, you're going to have my Firewall leveling build there, and my Blizzard build, and also this build will be posted over on there. There's also a tier list, which is constantly being updated, so you can check out which builds are going to be ranked the best. You can take a look at them, and this is a great way to find new builds. There's also a community build section where you can post your own build, and you can just go around here and check if there's anything that looks particularly interesting for you. It's a great way to find leveling builds, especially when other websites don't have things posted yet. This is often updated very frequently, and you can even get your own build featured on here in the community builds if you're interested in that. One of the good things about the desktop app is that you can actually just press Tab Q when you're in game, and you can easily reference any build that you want. For example, my Blizzard build. One of the best things about this is you can look at the Paragon board side by side. So if you wanted to copy paste a Paragon board, it's literally never been easier. You don't have to mess with another monitor or anything. Same thing with the skill tree, and you can quickly just look at what stats you want. So if I just killed a tormented boss, or I just got an amulet, I could be like, okay, what do I want on my amulet? Okay, Nick recommends ranks of devouring blaze, attack speed, cooldown reduction. All right, this amulet's pretty good. Same thing can be said for weapons, etc. So it's a great thing to have, especially if you're going to be utilizing any of my builds in the future. It just makes things really convenient. There's also a interactive map on here, which I found to be pretty helpful. But it's just nice being able to look at all the builds and constantly seeing things update and evolve. And I personally use it to look at new builds, see what people are finding out, and it's a great way to stay on top of the meta. You can download it completely for free using my link in the description, so make sure to check out Mobalytics, and thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. But also this build and all my other builds are going to be posted on there, so just check that out in the description. Let's talk about how this build actually functions and what you need to really start to get it going, because I would not recommend just slapping it on the second that you get to level 100. It'll certainly work if you want to do that, but it won't be as good as you really expect it to be. It needs a few things to kind of come online, which is why I'd recommend Blizzard first. Blizzard has almost no gear requirement and is just fantastic out of the gate, and it will do good at killing tormented bosses until you can swap to this build. Quickly, let's explain how it actually works. So the main thing is that we're going to be using the splintering aspect, which essentially just makes Lightning Spear do additional damage, and this is going to scale off of your crit damage bonus, so it just gives it effectively a different multiplier by scaling up your crit damage. This means that scaling our crit chance is also very important, but the single most important thing for us is just trying to spawn as many Lightning Spears as humanly possible, which is why we end up using the Fractured Winter Glass, and this build is pretty much not going to function at all without the Fractured Winter Glass. It will, but it'll just suck. Fractured Winter Glass has the effect where when you use Frozen Orb, it's going to have a chance to spawn a random conjuration, and your conjurations also have a chance to spawn Frozen Orbs. We also get the effect here where conjurations cooldowns are reduced when a Frozen Orb explodes. So basically what happens is you cast Conjurations. Those Conjurations have a lucky hit chance to cast out Frozen Orbs, and then you pair this with the Loop of Frozen Orbit, where Frozen Orbs explode additional times, and then based on each time it explodes, it will spawn even more Conjurations, and then you kind of just have the cycle of Frozen Orb explodes, spawns Conjurations, your Conjurations then spawn more Frozen Orbs, and you just get into this insane loop. You pair this with getting a ton of cooldown reduction, namely via Harlequin Crest, and the cooldown reduction that is inherent to the Fractured Winter Glass, constantly lowering the cooldowns of our Lightning Spear. We can end up having up to 50 Conjurations out simultaneously, which gives us a ridiculous amount of damage, not only because we just have so many Conjurations flying around doing so many instances of damage, but that's also going to scale up the Conjuration Mastery passive a crazy amount. Mine is only at rank 9, but if we were to have 50 stacks, that's 450% increased damage. Usually you're not going to have 50, usually you'll sit around 20 to 30, kind of depends on how much cooldown reduction you have, but the build is going to feel really bad until you get, I'd say, a Fractured Winter Glass that is Masterwork to probably around 8 out of 12 because you really want that cooldown, but also just getting a Harlequin Crest and full Masterworking it. Getting that flat cooldown reduction will reduce the Lightning Spear cooldown reduction a lot, meaning that you can pretty much just hold down Lightning Spear, and that is when the build is really going to start ramping like crazy, is when you don't have to worry about pressing Frozen Orb as much, and you can kind of just hold down Lightning Spear and spawn a whole bunch of Conjurations, and you get that feedback loop way quicker. So just as a recap and a general recommendation, I probably would not recommend swapping to this build until you get a decent Fractured Winter Glass, one that has a decent roll on the Conjuration cooldowns being reduced, and Conjuration Mastery. Those are the single most important, but also the Unique effect is fairly important as well, having a decently high lucky hit chance, so that you're getting a higher chance to spawn those Frozen Orbs and those Conjurations. Without this and Masterworking it to probably around 8 out of 12, the build will feel pretty weak and you'll have a hard time stacking up more than like 10 to 15 Conjurations consistently. Next to that, I would highly recommend getting Harlequin Crest first because the cooldown reduction inherent on it is very, very high, and then just try to Masterwork it and get a good amount of CDR. Next to that, definitely make sure you get a Talrasha. It just has CDR on it and that will help you a ton. Early on into the build, mana could be an issue for you, and you will have to supplement by pressing Frozen Orb a lot if your cooldown reduction is not low enough to basically warrant you or allow you to just hold down Lightning Spear over and over again. You'll have to supplement with Frozen Orbs in between, in which case your mana could be a little bit of a problem. So in the meantime, you could use Ring of Starless Skies instead of a Talrasha to help out with your resource, or you could use, you could put 3 points into Fiery Surge so that you just get some mana regeneration. That's effectively how the build works. You could swap to it earlier, but I would simply just recommend playing with Blizzard until you get a Harlequins to drop and you have a semi-decent Fractured Winter Glass. If you happen to get a normal helmet with like greater affix cooldown reduction, you could probably slide by with that in the meantime though. When it comes to the rest of the build and how it works, we are using the Ice Blades enchant, which is going to give us more Ice Blades. It increases the amount that we can have by a total of 3. So this is just going to give us more cooldown reduction and also just makes it to where we can have more Ice Blades out, which is just 3 more for our Conjuration Mastery. And then we have Firebolt enchant, so we can take advantage of like Devouring Blaze, Flame Feeder Glyph, Warmth for healing, damage reduction from burning, etc. For our other skills, Ice Armor is insane. This gives you a massive barrier, but also it is bugged with the Storm Swell aspect, giving us a huge damage increase. Teleport, 30% DR all the time, gives you Unstoppable, and it's just fun to play with Teleport, obviously. Lightning Spear is the crux of the build. Keep in mind, the damage is not actually Lightning Spear, the damage is only the splintering aspect. Talk more about that later when it comes to legendaries, etc. But ranking up our Lightning Spear does not really do anything. The only thing we care about is the splintering aspect and scaling that. Next, we have Unstable Currents. This is nice because it'll give us some attack speed and it also gives us some damage reduction because we end up playing with, what's it called here? We end up using Charge Bolts with 3 points for 25% DR. When it comes to the skill tree, a couple points into Firebolt, Potent Warding just for some maximum resistances there, and then we go into Teleport for the damage reduction. Because we have Harlequins, we don't have to put any points into Flame Shield. Flame Shield is just nice, to have an immunity pretty much, but you're so tanky with the build, you don't entirely need it. But nothing else that you're going to put on that's good. Glass Cannon for damage, Elemental Attunement, and then we go into Ice Armor. With Mystical Ice Armor, you'll have pretty much full uptime on Ice Armor once the build is fully rolling and you have enough cooldown reduction. Until then, you could play with Shimmering if you just want more uptime on it, but Mystical Ice Armor gives you more damage and it scales Storm Swell again, which is currently bugged. Protection, Mana Shield, just all damage reduction stuff. Conjuration Mastery is very good. Lightning Spear, Ice Blades for the cooldown reduction, and we want Lightning Spear critting, You don't care about the damage here because this does not increase the splintering aspect damage. This just increases the lightning spear damage, and all the damage is the splintering aspect. 3 points into Icy Veil to increase the duration on our ice armor there, which is pretty good, and our protection barriers. We don't really need the protection barrier one, but it's mainly just for ice armor. Then Devouring Blaze is 21% increased crit damage, or 30% against crowd controlled, and we have nearly 100% crit chance with this build ideally, so this just helps with our crit damage multi. And then Static Discharge is good because we're spawning Crackling Energies, and we want to be spawning Crackling Energies so we can pick them up and use them with Overflowing Energy to further reduce our cooldowns. We go into Unstable Currents for the attack speed there and the free Crackling Energies. And then Hoarfrost is 18% increased damage to frozen enemies, which we are freezing them via Frozen Orb. And then we go 3 points into Electrocution for 18% less damage taken. If you want less or like more damage reduction, you could go into Veer's Mastery instead of Overflowing Energy. And if you are having mana problems early on into the build, take 3 points out of Icy Veil and put 3 points into Fiery Surge, and that should help supplement you. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the gear. So when it comes to your weapon, and which is the most important thing, is the splintering aspect. Again, the entire build revolves around splintering aspect. So that's why you want to have it on a two-hander. If you go with a one-hander and a focus, you'll have more cooldown reduction, more attack speed, but you're literally cutting your main source of damage in half by doing that. You make up for it a bit with the cooldown reduction, but when the build is like fairly well set up, that cooldown reduction will not help you enough. And having it on the two-hander simply just way more damage output for you. So you want splintering on the two-hander. Obviously, a Fractured Winter Glass. Try to prioritize. It's difficult because there's three things that matter here. Because Conjuration Mastery gives you a ton of damage. But if you don't have the Conjuration cooldowns are being reduced enough by at least like 0.4 or 0.5, you won't be able to spam your Conjurations enough to get enough Conjuration stacks for Conjuration Mastery to be super powerful. In addition to that, you want the unique effect, the lucky hit chance effects, to be rolled relatively high as well, because without that at a decent roll, you're not going to spawn as many frozen orbs or as many conjurations. So you kind of want like a good mix. The non-fizz damage and the chance for frozen orb projectiles to cast twice really is not all that important. I would try to just get a good mix of the cooldown reduced and the conjuration mastery. I quite like mine. I got it greater affix on the cooldown reduction there, and I think having that at 0.5 or 0.6 is pretty ideal. And then Conjuration Mastery at +6 or +7 is pretty good. You want all your Masterworks to land into that. If you are an absolute psychopath about any of your materials and just Masterwork rerolling stuff, I would definitely try to make sure that your Amulet rolls pretty well with 1 or 2 Masterworks on the cooldown reduction and 1 or 2 Masterworks on the Conjuration Mastery. That is going to be your best bet. These are very expensive and very hard to come by. Highly recommend farming Lord Zir until you get a pretty decent one, because that is like the main source of damage from this build and the entire functionality of it. That tangent aside, Taurasha is great for cooldown reduction. The reason that we use Taurasha versus Starless Skies is that when the build is fully set up, you're actually not spending your resource, you're literally just sitting there holding down Lightning Spear, and you will nerf the amount of conjurations that you're getting by pressing Frozen Orb. Additionally, Starless Skies does not have cooldown reduction. The main thing that you get from it is 50% damage and crit chance and attack speed, but you can crit cap yourself without Starless Skies, and Taurasha is just better for the cooldown reduction, and you get 60% increased damage from it. You can't get a 4th elemental stack, but still 60% increased damage. Early on, the cooldown reduction is very good. If you're having mana problems, just bite the bullet and use Starless Skies until then, but we don't use Starless Skies over a normal legendary because we pretty much have to have the Frozen Orbit legendary on so that our Frozen Orb detonates twice. And then Storm Swell is currently bugged, so you get 30% damage to enemies that are vulnerable while you have a barrier for 1. And then if you have Ice Armor up, you get another 30%. And then if they are frozen, you get another 30%. So this just gives us basically 90% damage, which is just way more valuable than having Ring of Starless Skies, especially because this crit chance effectively gets lost. And then for the rest of our stuff, Esu's Heirloom is insane, 40% crit chance by simply just pressing spacebar, and it has a very high amount of crit damage on it, and the build scales off of crit damage. Tyrell's Might is fantastic for survivability. You do not have to have Tyrell's Might for the build to function, but it is very good for damage reduction. And then Harlequin's Quest, I would say, is almost mandatory because you just get 20% DR, 44% cooldown reduction if you masterwork it properly, or like on average 30% if you get a decent masterwork. So the flat cooldown reduction on this is just absolutely disgusting. Lastly, some mentions. A lot of people like to go with Fist of Fate. The reason that you don't care about Fist, or you don't want to do Fist of Fate, is because the additional effect on it, the chance for attacks to deal extra damage, does not work for splintering, so you're just nerfing your damage by using this. The lucky hit on it is pretty good for the Fractured Winterglass effect, but then you would have to lose Stormswell. It's a whole nightmare trying to fit in Fist of Fate. For 99% of people, I would never recommend it. And then for the pants, you have two options. Tibalt's Will is slightly better for damage, but it is worse for survivability because the damage reduction while unstoppable is not active all the time, whereas if you have a normal pair of pants, you can get Conjuration skills, 25% DR all the time, and you can temper Warmth, which I really like. You do have skill points that go into Warmth if you want, but you could otherwise spend it on like Icy Veil, and you'd have to spend quite a lot to get Warmth. This just gives you a really nice amount of healing, feels really comfortable. And on a normal pair of pants, you could realistically get greater affix intelligence and max HP. It's not that difficult to get that. And then I just slammed in some topazes to kind of make up for the loss in damage from Tibalt's. If you want some more damage, go for Tibalt's. I just went for the more survivability oriented thing, and you get some dodge chance, which is helpful as well. This is more of a preference thing, to be honest with you. Stats on gear. Already talked about, I'll just talk about which masterworks you want. So Harlequin, all cooldown reduction. Tyrael's Might, you want 2 into DR, 1 into maximum resistance. Gloves, you want crit chance, crit damage, attack speed. You don't need too much attack speed. And when it comes to crit chance, you want to have 85% because your Lightning Spear by default has an additional 15% applied to it. So you only need 85%. Why am I looking at my materials? So when you press spacebar, you want it to say 85%. So if I can find my crit chance here, currently I'm at 57. If I press spacebar, I go up to 78. So I'm missing around 6% there, which is why I end up just popping, or 7%. That's why I just pop Elixirs of Precision for some more crit chance. Or you could try to get a greater affix on crit chance on your gloves or your ring, or have the Masterworks kind of land on the crit chance. For the most damage possible, you would just get all greater affix stuff, and you would have all your Masterworks land on the crit damage, because the crit damage scales the splintering aspect. So try to prioritize the crit damage there, and then you want Lightning Spear lucky hit chance. This just helps a tiny, very, very tiny amount for the Fractured Winterglass lucky hit. Then on the pants, another benefit is you can get the Lightning Spear lucky hit, and again, if you don't have Tibalt's, try to just go for Int max HP, try to get all, if you want damage, try to get all the greater affix Masterwork stuff on Int. If you want HP, go for HP obviously. Esu's, all of the rolls on here suck. Just make sure you get a 40% crit and make sure the crit damage is decent, and try to get all the Masterworks into crit damage. When it comes to the weapon, you want Int, max HP, crit damage. Try to have all the Masterworking go into crit damage. If one of the Masterworks go into chance for Lightning Spear to cast twice, that would get it to 100%, so that is not too bad. 1 into Int is okay too, but ideally try to get the crit damage and try to have it be on the temper, because the temper rolls higher than a greater affix. And then for your rings, same as gloves, attack speed, crit chance, and crit damage, and try to have the tempers land on crit damage unless you need a tiny bit more, or sorry, you want the Masterworks to land on crit damage unless you need a tiny bit more of crit chance. And then Talrasha, you want it to land on all cooldown, and Fractured Winterglass, like I said, probably, depending on your role, you probably want 2 on Conjuration Mastery and 1 on cooldown reduction, but if you get 2 on cooldown reduction and 1 on Conjuration Mastery, that is a good outcome as well. Hard to tell which one is better, honestly. It probably is dependent on your individual role, how much cooldown reduction you have, and what scenario you're in, honestly. They're probably comparable to each other. I think having the cooldown reduction higher simply just feels better and is overall more consistent, and you don't really need another, like, I could lose a few ranks to Conjuration Mastery and the build is still going to absolutely annihilate everything. Each rank is a crazy amount of damage though, so do what you will with that information. When it comes to the Paragon board, full credit to Makuna for this one. Straight up just copy pasted this, and credit to him in general, as well as Northwar and all those guys that did a lot of theory crafting with the build. I just wanted to make my own video to explain the build to you guys, but big credit to all of them. There is not really much that can be improved on here, so I did not make any changes that are absolutely notable because they already did all of it, and you don't fix what isn't broken, right? I'm not going to change something just for the sake of it being different. First board, we like to go control. You could actually swap control for reinforce for more damage reduction, or you could go into unleash for straight up more damage. But control is 20% against frozen enemies or stunned, and everything's stunned and frozen. If you want more boss damage though, go into unleash. And then we have Tactician. This is damage, and it gives us damage to burning and damage reduction from burning, which is great. Grab some max HP and non-fizz here to cap out our Frigid Fate. Elementalist is just 15% increased damage all the time, which is real nice, and it gives us non-fizz. And then we go charged. We spawn Crackling Lightning, so this is just 15% damage all the time. And then we get Frigid Fate for a 60% bonus. Then we have Elemental Summoner here. We are pretty much only using this for the cooldown reduction. We don't care about the bonus in damage because our damage is all from the splintering aspect, and I believe this does not scale that. And then again, we go Conjuration Glyph just for the increase in duration, not the damage, because we don't care. This does not scale the conjuration or the splintering aspect. Then we go into Destruction, max this out because splintering scales off crit damage. And then we go into Flame Feeder for extra damage, and you can grab a little bit of extra crit damage here. And then we go into the Exploit Glyph for damage to vulnerable enemies, just as another multi, and there's some damage to stunt here, which isn't all that relevant. That's pretty much it for the build. It's actually really easy to play with. I would highly recommend putting Lightning Spear on something that you can just hold down. Once you have the build fully set up, you don't need to press Frozen Orb very much at all. You pretty much just hold down right click, or whatever you put Lightning Spear on, and you'll just constantly summon them. However, if there's not a ton of mobs up, then you may have to throw in some Frozen Orbs here and there, or to kind of, before the build gets rolling, or ramping rather, and you have a lot of Conjurations out, and you're getting all that cooldown reduction, you might have to throw out some Frozen Orbs. Especially when the build is in its infancy, you will have to throw some Frozen Orbs out, in which case, again, you might have to go into Fiery Surge node to get a little bit of mana compensation, or you could use a resource cost reduction elixir as well. When it comes to other elixirs, attack speed, lucky hit is pretty good, or you could go for fortitude for more HP, or if you're missing a little bit of crit chance, elixir of precision is quite nice, and you get some crit damage too, which is what I'm personally using. Otherwise, you kind of just press your buttons on cooldown. Make sure you're pressing spacebar all the time because it's going to give you 40% crit chance, so that is a massive damage increase. For everything else, I mean, just press it on cooldown, save your flame shield for whenever you want it. You want to have Unsayable Currents up all the time, ideally, but it's not a huge deal. And I mean, the build's really brain dead. Like, you're just, Lightning Spear is just going to completely carry you and annihilate everything. You'll notice that in higher density, or if when fighting bosses, you'll just do way better. And it's kind of nice to do T8 Infernal Hordes with like a full group of 4, because the mobs will live for more than like half a second. So then the more hits that your Conjurations get, the more lucky hits they get, the more Frozen Orbs they spawn, the more Frozen Orbs they spawn, the more Conjurations you get, blah, 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 blah. And then it'll just feel a lot nicer, and you get way more cooldown reduction that way. You'll notice that as you get more cooldown reduction, as you masterwork your Fractured Winterglass, the build will simply just come together a lot more and feel much nicer to play. When you first swap to it and you don't have too much CDR, you don't have a great amulet, the mobs are, not living as long, and you can't like get rolling, you can't get that initial feedback loop going, it can feel a little bit weak. But once it kind of all comes together, then you just ramp up instantly. It's really about that ramp up period kind of getting faster, and then once you're ramped, you can get up to 50 Conjuration Mastery stacks. That's pretty much it for the build. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it down in the comments. I hope that you guys found the video helpful. One thing with this build is that it's really nice when doing the Infernal Hordes when you get the Invigoration buff, because it gives you a crazy amount of cooldown reduction and attack speed, and you just absolutely blast off, and it is a lot of fun. This one person will not stop Snapchatting me. I'm recording a video, dude. Anyways, yeah, that's pretty much it. Feel free to leave a comment if you got any questions. Definitely check out the Blizzard video if you want a build to use in the meantime, and Firewall is great for leveling. Alternatively, I'm going to be posting an Andariel's Rogue video pretty soon here, so make sure to check that out. And if you have any other builds you want me to upload, let me know down in the comments. I'm probably going to work on Fireball next, because I quite like Fireball, so just let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.